I want to get your thoughts on something else because we are going to hear a lot of discussion about the Bush tax cuts in the coming weeks and months. And, as somebody who served in the Bush administration, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. And I want to put up a sound quote from Fareed Zakaria in Newsweek. He says the Bush tax cuts remain the single largest cause of America's structural deficit. That is, the deficit not caused by the collapse in tax revenues when the economy goes into recession. The simple fact is that all the Bush tax cuts were unaffordable. They were an irresponsible act of hubris enacted during an economic boom. Your thoughts on that, Carl?
Well, I think he's absolutely wrong. In fact, he ought to look at the record. The Bush tax cuts led to a couple of things. They led to, first of all, the largest amount of revenue being received by the government. They helped encourage economic growth and grew tax revenues. Second of all, they helped bring about 52 months of consecutive job growth, the longest period of job growth in American history. And Mr. Zakaria is missing the problem that we face, which is twofold. One is the structural problems that we face with entitlements, which are outstripping the sources of revenue for them, Social Security and Medicare, and in particular, and the ones for which we had drawn general revenues, like Medicaid. This is the biggest spending problem, and virtually every economist acknowledges that we have a huge problem with this. And second of all, we have a problem in that Mr. Zakaria's favorite candidate for president and his favorite president, President Obama, has increased the size of the federal government by 1/4 since he came into office. When he came into office, the federal government was taking roughly 20% of the GDP. Today, it's taking 25% of the GDP and is under the Obama economic plan scheduled to take that for most of the next decade.
Yeah.
Those are the problems. We got a problem with spending, not a problem with revenues.
Yeah, but you're going to see, I think, a focus on the conversation trying to be pushed back towards this area and saying, if you just tax these 1% of the U.S. economy, you're going to bring in hundreds of billions of dollars over the coming years. It's going to be a tough argument.
Well, yeah, look, most of the tax cut, if you take a look at the total tax cut the tax increase that's going to occur next year, most of it is going to be paid, the vast majority of it is going to be paid by 95% of the taxpayers who make less than $250,000 a year, because the biggest tax break, for example, was to take the bottom tax rate 15% and drop it to 10%,
right,
giving people a 33% cut in their taxes. We took 12 million people off of the tax rolls. They're now going to be added back onto the tax rolls unless something happens. Right. But at the top, half of small businesses are going to pay higher taxes because they file at the personal rate,
and they're going to get hit.